The footage you're seeing is alpha footage with a lot of experimental stuff. As such, there's a lot less polish and some art assets that are stand-ins. I hope you find this story insightful. When I released the demo for Orestorm Factory a year ago, it was my first real game, and overall I was very happy with the results. I put it on Steam, Crazy Games, Armor Games, and itch.io. In that year, Crazy Games got 8k plays, 323 upvotes, and 65 downvotes, resulting in an 8.3 out of 10, which I was very happy with. On Armor Games, it got 19k plays, with a rating of 4.8 out of 10, which was troubling, but understandable once I realized the game doesn't really warn you that it's unplayable on mobile, whereas Crazy Games prevented you from playing it on mobile, and the comments made it pretty clear that this was the case, and a lot of those downvotes were due to this. On itch.io, it got 209 plays, with a single comment that was vaguely positive, but complained about the difficulty. Also, weirdly enough, it got uploaded to a bunch of other Flash game sites without my consent, the biggest of which being Y8, with 4k plays and an 8.4 out of 10. The ratings of which show up if you Google the game, which was weird to me, but my goal has always been to show people a thing I made, so I'm not particularly fussed if people share it. And finally, on Steam it has 300 plays. As only the demo is out, it doesn't have any reviews. However, I've added a bunch of Steam achievements to the game, which gives surprisingly good analytics for these plays. Of these 300 plays, 55% finished the tutorial, 24% survived to Wave 4, 21% bought an upgrade, 15% survived to Wave 8, 10% survived to Wave 13 and encountered the boss, 9% beat the game, and last but not least, 3% of players beat the game without upgrades by playing as Spheric. So to those 9 people, good work. That is a seriously difficult challenge. I think myself and only 2 playtesters managed it. The big takeaways from this experiment was, it's really hard to convince people to download and play a game. And because of that, the majority of players played on web, which the game wasn't really built to play on. This led to a lot of people complaining about the game crashing when too many objects were spawning. Secondarily, half of the players weren't completing the tutorial, which is great information as it shows the tutorial is either too complex or not fun enough. This completely blindsided me when the game came out, as playtesters had all finished it reasonably comfortably, but I had overlooked their obligation to get through it. Orestorm definitely wasn't hooking players in fast enough, and I think a lot of players wrote it off because I couldn't convey to them what made the game fun. Secondly, the game is just far too difficult, and not in a way the majority of players found fun. I found the specific flow state very interesting, concurrently testing micro and macro parts of my decision making, in a way I'd really only seen with games like StarCraft. But players consistently found the difficulty was impeding their fun rather than adding challenge. Thirdly, it turns out people have very strong opinions on what a roguelike is. My logic was that restarting from zero, but with minor upgrades, made the game work as a roguelite, as every game you had to build a new base on a new map, then once you beat the game, you could try to beat it without upgrades, kind of like how Hades does. The actual definitions of roguelike and roguelite are a bit up in the air, so I thought it was fair to call this a roguelike/roguelite. However, I got a lot of angry comments saying that it wasn't. I think this comes down to people's expectations for the genre more than the actual definitions, but either way, I'll probably drop the term roguelike for future releases just to be safe. And finally, people online can be very critical, and whilst it's very understandable to criticize, I didn't expect it to be so severe for what I perceived to be a free experimental game demo. It took more of a toll on my enthusiasm to keep pursuing the project than I'd anticipated. My goal was always to make a game that I enjoy, and if other people like it, that's great, but I'm not interested in making a game for mass appeal. All in all, I learnt a lot of things with this project, and the ones I've done since. The codebase for Orestorm isn't great, as I was still learning Godot as I made it, and as such, I don't think I'm going to continue development work in the long term. So instead, my plan is to finalize the game this year and release it for $1 or so on Steam. Despite most of the problems I've mentioned so far having less to do with the game itself and more to do with the business decisions around the game, the key thing I can change moving forward is trying to make the game the best version of itself that it can be. Since that initial release, every few months I've come back and tried to make Orestorm Factory the best game it can be by making some radically different versions of the game. I've tried making it into a tower defense game, where you feed ores into the turrets, but it felt like it was veering too close to Mindustry or Two Time Towers, and couldn't take full advantage of the things that make it unique. I tried a survival game, where you had a home base, and you had to fill it with ores to keep the monsters away, but you had to leave the safety of the base to go into the abyss to find more ores to send home. But I never found a good way to stop the player's best course of action to be from AFKing in base, without making the game more stressful than the current version. I tried a game like Raft or Minecraft Skyblock, where you catch ores in the air and slowly build a bigger area to traverse, but dodging the ores in a constricted platform wasn't very fun, and felt like it took away from the key goal of making a big complex spaghetti base. Finally, I tried making a real roguelike, where you can shoot ores out at enemies, pick up power-ups, and have to work your way through 4 floors with a boss fight on each floor. Whilst I'm still not fully happy with this one, it definitely stood out as the most interesting so far, so that's the one I'm still currently working on. As you probably noticed in the footage, each level has 3 altars, which now require a specific recipe to be turned on. Turning on all 3 of the altars spawns the boss, and killing that boss starts the next level. This resets the player's ore count and drops them on a fresh floor. Each floor has harder enemies and a new boss, culminating on floor 4, which makes you beat all 3 of the previous bosses at once. I really like this basis, except for how cumbersome and unclear the mechanic to spawn the bosses is. If I can figure out a way to make that work, I'll likely spend the rest of the time making item shops and trying to design more interesting power-ups than basic attack boosts and HP and ore drops. In the meantime, I've been focusing on a couple of other features right now, so that I'm better prepared for the future. I've started on focusing on designing for accessibility, with my key concern being making sure that I've always got controller support. I'm yet to figure out how to make controller support viable with the current control scheme. In my test version, I've added a cursor that could be controlled via the right stick, but it's horribly cumbersome, and will likely cause some mechanical strain. So whatever the final version of Orestorm looks like, I'm going to make sure that it's playable with a controller, or at the very least, couch co-op where player 2 can use the controller to help out, but that's the last resort I'm hoping to avoid. Secondly, I've built in systems for a ghost player, who can walk around the map and place buildings based on a string of commands. This might be for multiplayer, or a replay system, or for some form of time loop shenanigans where your previous self is placing stuff and inconveniencing you. Either way, the current version is built that these actions can be stored and replayed, so that future changes for things like multiplayer will be far easier. Finally, I've been dabbling with some visual updates. One thing I noticed is that games with distinct and consistent styles do better. And the fact that my pixel art doesn't snap when moving is also probably putting a lot of people off, so I'm considering some radically different art styles. I've never ended up deciding between top-down and side-on art, because I like the enemies and players being side-on, but the buildings needed to be top-down for visual clarity. So in my testing, I'm planning on making some radical changes to the aesthetics as well, which may mean saying goodbye to the wizards, but time will tell. This has been a long rant for a long overdue update. If anyone did make it this far, thanks. And I hope you enjoy Orestorm Factory when it finally comes out. Also, just a quick shout out to the people who do leave positive comments. It really does mean a lot, especially to Dracabatic. Your recent comment inspired me to finally formally write this all up. If you haven't wishlisted the game on Steam yet, it would mean a lot. And if you're looking for similar games to play in the meantime, I'd recommend Atrio, Factorio, Mindustry, Satisfactory, and Shapes.io. Also, Unpaused Games recently dropped a video designing an automation-based dungeon crawler that explores similar ideas in a very different way, that also might be of interest to you. I've been Phobius, thanks.